welcome to the Velocity Tuning channel. Today's video is how to understand an M5 data log. Whether you're running stock power, an OTS map, or you've got a custom map, it can be real useful to see exactly how the car is running. Looking at that data log, you can see all these variables. Don't really understand what's going on? Well, today I'm going to show you. So here's the setup for today's test. We've got the M5 on the four-wheel drive dyno. We've got it loaded up with the stock calibration. We have got some cheeky race fuel in it because today we're supposed to be doing gearbox development for our custom gearbox map, but we've been rained off, so here we are instead. So we're actually going to be doing some dyno runs with race fuel and a stock map, which is a little bit weird, but you guys get to see how race fuel affects a stock car, I guess. So I'm going to do the first dyno pull. The data loggers are slightly different depending on what software you're using, but the principles are the same. They're all logging the same ECU. So what I show you today with this will be applicable to other platforms as well. So this dyno run is going to be done in 5th gear. Start the logger now, and here we go. One run complete. That's our 3 dyno runs complete. The best run was 636 bhp. The second best run was 635 bhp. And we had another run that was just under 630. That is stock calibration, no cats, and race fuel in the car. So it's just over what BMW claim, but with no cats and race fuel in it, it makes sense that it would be making some more. Torque-wise as well, we are making slightly more than BMW claim, with 770 Newton meters and 780 Newton meters on the dyno runs. So now that's done, let's go have a look at the data logs, see what's actually going on with the car. Okay, so we've got a data log in front of us. There's quite a lot to look at. There's a lot of swiggly lines going everywhere. It could be a little bit overwhelming at first, but don't worry, we're going to break it down into some smaller sections, make it a bit easier to deal with. So if you look at the whole log, like I say, it can be quite confusing. So if you went with 4 sections, you could go with something potentially like boost, throttle, load and torque. You could have a second section, which could be ignition and knock. You could have a third section, which would be fueling. You could have a fourth section, which would be temperature. And by breaking it down into 4 smaller sections, it's going to be easier to understand. So before I get right into this, it's worth mentioning that although it says stage 2 at the top, it is not stage 2. This is a stock calibration, but it was flashed back to stock with a different tool. So this software is unaware of that map switch. Secondly, looking at the bottom, you're going to see tons and tons of different addresses that you can log. All these ones here that say RAM, they're the ones that are going to give you the most accurate and best information. For example, boost target, if you use this one, it gets capped around 22.5 psi. If you use to look at the load, that gets capped around 190. So there's a lot of maximum values for these, where if you go over to the RAM, it's going to give you the true value and make it a lot easier to understand. So anytime you're confronted with a RAM or a non-RAM log and you're unsure which one to click, go with the RAM. Okay, so let's make this log a little bit easier to deal with. Now, unless you've got a particular issue, it's not really too important what the car is doing off full throttle. So all of here, as I'm going through the gears, we can take that out of the way. Here, as I've come off the throttle, we can take that out of the way. Let's work with when the car is at full throttle doing the pull. So we've now got important information, and of course there's a lot to look at. So if we click deselect all, we've now got nothing, or that's a double negative really. We now have nothing. So let's add in what we need for boost, throttle, load and torque. Section 1. Boost, throttle, load and torque. So we all know what boost is. That is the amount of pressure trying to get into the engine. Then we've got our throttle, our load and our torque. And what you're going to see is all of these work together, hence why they're all in one section. Now, although this car being on a stock calibration, it is not actually running ideally. So, and the reason for that being is there's no CATs, there's no OPF, it has got some aggressive race fuel in it, and it has only just been flashed to stock, meaning that it is adapting and adjusting itself. So let's have an actual look at the graph and see what I want to show you guys and why it's not ideal. So here's the beginning of the run, here's the end of the run, and this is like a time scale across. And what you're going to see is as the run goes along, the engine RPM picks up. So you can see here, we're in 5th gear, and you can see right up at the top of the run, we get up to 6,700 RPM. So what am I talking about? If we click somewhere like this, and we go down to the 3rd column, we've got boost pre-throttle. So pre-throttle means before the throttle body. So it's not the inlet manifold. So if the throttle was to close, you could potentially see more boost in this area and less boost in the inlet manifold. They are not always doing exactly the same thing. But anyway, we can see that we've got 18 PSI here. And then if we go down a little bit and we go down to like the 3rd black dot, you can see you've got boost to pre-throttle again, but this one's DME2. That is also at 18 PSI. But below that, the first RAM address is boost pressure, and the target is only 17 PSI. So we're actually making near to 1 PSI more than what the ECU is actually requesting. And there's consequences to that. And that can be seen by looking at the throttle angle. So it's at 67% here. And look, it builds up, gets to 70, drops back down to 60. Around here, it's at 40. So the whole time that it's making more boost than it wants to, it's using that throttle to pull it back. Now, the throttle doesn't always need to be at 100%. As you're changing gear, if traction control kicks in, even the way some calibrations are written, including stock ones, they may feed the throttle angle up as you go through the RPM. But anytime you're seeing dips and drabs, or like you say here, it's going down to like 40%, that's a problem that needs to be dealt with. So if this was actually running more power and it was on a tune, we'd be looking at some compressor maps for the turbo. We'd be pulling those down, and we try to get it so that it wouldn't be over boosting. And part of that would be looking at the math, and it would be looking at the boost set point. So if you keen people, you may know this car has no math sensor, but it does calculate math still, and as such, a lot of the wastegate tables are using math. So what does the car do when it's overboosting? Is it just it closes the throttle? No, it has something called a PID system. PID systems are not just used on cars. They're like a closed loop system that allows the car to make its own corrections. But when the changes are not getting the desired effect, you may see that the throttle angle is also getting involved. So that's our boost, and that's what I can show you that's not quite right about the boost. But how does that affect the other parts? So if we look at the load, you're going to see that the load numbers are also relative. So if you look here, load actual, about midway down that table, is 171, but the target's only at 168. So we can see our load is also higher than our target. If we have a look at our torque, if you go down to at the bottom where you've got torque at clutch, our actual torque is also nearly 10 Newton meters higher than our target. And that's because they all work together. So you may be thinking, what is load? Well, that is the way this ECU tells the engine to make power. So load is a combination of the boost, the ignition timing, the fueling, the VANOS, the compression ratio. It's looking at everything, and it's coming up with load as an amount of power that it is producing. It is one of the main things that us tuners are using to make power. We are working these load tables, we're working these torque tables to get the power that's required. And it's a complicated system where as you improve something like fueling, that may affect the ignition timing, where you may find that it doesn't actually need to make as much boost to make the same power. So there's lots of variables going on, and it's a clever system that works really well when it's set up properly. Finally, we've got torque. So as you can see here, we've got some torque limit flags. Now, the gearbox can also tell the engine to pull its power. and you may see that through a torque limit. Now, when the car is changing gear, for example, it's quite often to see a torque limit 4. You may see some timing corrections. So everything's working hand in hand. And sometimes when you see these flags, if it is something like a gear change, it's completely normal to see. So that sort of wraps up most of the parts that we're looking for. There are some other things if you're trying to fix a problem that can be useful. So for example, we've got the wastegate duty cycle. That is the first red one going down. And you'll see here it's at 61%. So that means the wastegate is 60% closed. You see here it's at 50, 40. If you go to beginning of the run, you can see it's at 100%. So it's closed right off to generate its boost. And then as we get through the RPM, it eases it off. Now, we have had cars that are making good power on the dyno, and we've actually looked at the logs and we can see that the wastegate's pinned at like 99%. So the turbo is still making the amount of boost that it should do, but the turbo is having to work a lot harder than it would normally. And then when we've carried out something like a smoke test, we've actually seen that there was a leak. And the one that I'm referring to, the throttle body had become loose on the inlet manifold, and it was just a small leak there. So it was still making a ton of boost, but that turbo was working a lot harder. And over time, you may have actually seen that the turbo would have failed because it may have overspun. So that's where some of these other values can come in handy when trying to identify issues. That is section 1 covered. Section 2 of this video is going to take us over to ignition and knock. Ignition is extremely important. You could actually have a car that is running less boost than equivalent car, but is faster just because it's got more aggressive ignition timing. Also, ignition timing is one way where an engine can get damaged. So if it is knocking or you're getting pre-ignition, you may find that you end up with a damaged engine, and that's why it's really important to look here. So for example, you guys that run MEF, if your MEF stops working, you may see that you're getting a ton of timing corrections. If you are used to using a high quality fuel and then for some reason you have to put a lower quality fuel in, you may see you're getting a ton of timing corrections. So what exactly is ignition timing? What is going on? So if you imagine the piston is traveling up and down and the crank is spinning around in a 360 motion, when that piston is right at the top, it's considered top dead center. Well, if you was to wind back that crank 10 degrees, that would be what we're looking at on cylinder timing 1. So ignition timing 1 is at 10. That means it's 10 degrees before top dead center when it's sparking. Well, you guys may be thinking, why would a cylinder want to have a combustion process happening as the piston is traveling upwards? Well, it actually takes some time for the event to occur and build its full combustion to push the piston back down. And depending on the temperature, depending on the fuel used, the compression ratio, the amount of boost that you've got, lots of variables are going to decide how far past top dead center you're going to get before that combustion is actually forcing that piston back down. Also, engine speed is of course a big one. So looking here, you can see that 10 degrees before top dead center, it is sparking. Well, it may be 20 or 30 degrees past top dead center before it is actually pushing the piston back down. So you'll look through here, and you'll see that each cylinder has got a slightly different timing number in it. If you go to this point, for example, you can see that cylinder 3 has only got 7 degrees in it, where cylinder 4 has got 12 degrees. If you look at the timing correction though, there is 0 across the board. So what that's telling us is that there's no knock occurring. It is not detecting anything where it's saying this fuel quality is not good enough. What you're going to find here is this could be part of the torque management. This is the way that the car is generating its power, and it's actually super common on an F90 to see lower timing on cylinder 3. If you do find that you're getting timing corrections, you need to do more to drop your temperatures. You may need to do something to get a better quality fuel in. You may need to drop your boost. You may need to actually reduce the amount of ignition being requested. But this is a real important one to keep an eye on. You want to make sure that you're not getting tons and tons of timing. Now, if I go up to here, you can see that at this point, cylinder 1 actually pulls 1.5 degrees out. Well, this is a stock calibration with 109 in it. So it is super, super safe for the engine at this point. But as you can see, it is still picking up on cylinder 1. 1.5 degrees is nothing to worry about. If you're getting a few degrees here and there being pulled, don't be concerned. When you're seeing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 degrees being pulled out, that's when you need to be looking into getting it rectified. Now, also, we have a knock detection. Now, across here, you can see there is 0 across the board. If you're getting knock detected, that's something you really want to be concerned about. You want to make sure that you deal with that, because knock can damage the engine. There are times when you can get phantom knock. So if you have an engine that's been faulted and it's got a set of liners in it, for example, you may find that the knock detection system is no longer able to work as it did, because there's different type of metals within the engine now. But for guys that are stage 1, stage 2, keep an eye on these. Make sure that you're not getting knocked. Make sure the timing corrections are not too heavy. Onto that third section, and that is fueling. So it could be broken down into 3 subsections. First one would be the pressure, the second one would be the actual air fuel ratio, and the third one would be the trims. So firstly, and personally most important on a BMW, I would say is the fuel pressure, because whether you're in an M55, a B58, an S55, you can see that your fuel pressures are dipping. If you look at this car, it's requesting 5,000 PSI, but it's on the second generation of high pressure pumps. The earlier ones requested less than this, around 3,000 PSI. And if you go through this log, you can see, because I'm running a stock calibration, there ain't really any issues through this. We dip down to like 4.9 at some points, but you can see that's holding strong. What tends to happen with a high pressure pump is it doesn't just fall off a little bit, it absolutely crashes when you're getting a problem, and it will cause misfires. Now, there's a few workarounds for it. You could add a methanol kit. If you're running ethanol, you may find that you need to drop back the mixture because it's needing too much fuel to be flowed, or there may be an option for your car for you to fit an uprated high pressure fuel pump. But that is something for you guys to keep an eye on with high pressure fueling. On to the second, and we've got our air fuel ratio. So AFR, you can see at the moment on that part of it, it's at 14.7. If you was to work it in Lambda, which I prefer, you can see it's at 0.99. Now, on this stock calibration, if you look through this, for you guys that are into tuning and know a bit about cars already, you'll probably be quite surprised to see that Lambda is just holding at 14 and at 0.9. It's actually real lean. Now, the way this is set up on the stock calibration is if it gets too hot or it gets to a point where it's unhappy, it's switching to component protection, and you will see that the fuel target goes super, super rich. Now, when we're tuning these, we tend to rework that that calibration and the way that it's working. So, for example, you may find that one of these on a tune, stage 1 is running like a 12.2 or 0.8 Lambda. But that's something for you to be mindful of. Now, when you have a stock calibration, the car is not generating as much heat. One of the reasons why we run them rich is to counter that heat. It helps cool down the cylinders. But yeah, you will see that the way different people tune cars and the difference between stock and tuned can really make a difference on the sort of AFR being targeted and at which point it starts to go rich. Lean is something that you want to avoid, and if you're getting problems with the fuel pressure targets, for example, you may see that Lambda starts to lean out. Onto the third part of fueling, and we've got the short-term fuel trims. Now, you may see your fuel trims go real wonky. For example, if you've got a bad injector, or if you're running a ethanol blend, if you get the mix completely wrong, it may really throw out the fuel trims. So basically what that is the amount of fuel the engine was expecting to have to inject is 1. When that value goes higher or lower, what that is saying is, hang on a second, I'm having to put in more fuel or less fuel than I was expecting. So, for example, for you guys that know about ethanol, you will know that the amount of ethanol being injected is different from when it's just normal fuel. And for you guys that know about injectors, if you had a leaky injector, for example, you may see that the engine is having to pull fuel out because there's more fuel than it was expecting. So that is how the fuel trims work. If you've made it all the way to section 4 without falling asleep, congratulations. Section 4, temperature. A lot easier to understand than the other 3, but equally as important. So there's many different temperatures being read by the car. That could be gearbox temperature, it could be the diff temperature, it could be the temperature outside, it could be the intake temperature, coolant temperature, oil temperature. It can even be calculated temperatures like the exhaust system, for example. And what we usually find that we're paying the most attention to is IATs. For example, when I'm on a dyno, it can be really hard to keep the cars cool, and that IAT may be what I'm watching before I do another dyno run. The higher that IAT number is, the less power you are going to make. For example, when it's the winter, the air is more dense, so there is more oxygen in a given area. And as things get hotter, there is less oxygen in a given area. So for that reason, we want fins as cold as possible. Heat is our enemy. Hence why we use things like methanol, and there's intercoolers and charge coolers. We're trying to keep those temperatures low. Now, I have done remote tunes for people where they've sent over a log. The IATs are at like 150, and then that's indicated a problem. We've been able to look into it and see, oh, hang on a second, you haven't got no coolant in your charge cooler system, or the pump's failed. But what the car's going to do is, the hotter that it gets, the more power that it's going to pull out of itself to protect it. We've actually had cars where we've mapped them in, they are really, really fast, they've gone through events, they're running slow, gone through the logs, super high IAT. Oh, hang on a second, I've got a hole in my charge cooler radiator, I better not run again. And it's literally protected them from getting into a worse situation or potentially damaging the car. So the IATs are going high and the car is holding itself back because of that. Now, on this log, you can see two other temperatures. That is oil temperature and coolant temperature. Now, you can change the thermostat for the oil so that it keeps a cooler target. And for the coolant, actually in the configuration of things like boot model MHD, or if you're having a custom map from me, you can ask for me to change it. You can change the coolant set point. So just by going into the ECU, you can set the coolant lower. You may be thinking, why would you do that? Well, as I said, heat is the enemy. And if you're on track and you're finding that your temperatures are rising, as you see through here, look, if we start here, we're at 214, up at this point, we're at 219. Well, if that run started and it was actually at 200, by the time it gets up to there, it might only be at 210, for example, meaning that you've gave yourself a bigger buffer before the car is starting to pull power or get into an unsafe situation. So temperatures, super, super important. Now, I've covered all four areas of the data log. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. If I put it all on again, now it doesn't look too overwhelming. We've broke it up into smaller sections and it should be a lot easier to understand. If you've watched all of this video and you haven't just skipped forward to the end, then congratulations. You're a real nerd. You're a real rarity. There's not many of us out there like that. There's not many people that are going to watch through a screen recording of a laptop, going through data logs and find it interesting. But for you guys that do find it interesting, I love yous. It's how I got into tuning myself. I find it really fun. I find it really interesting. And if you guys have managed to learn something from what I've gone through today, then that also makes me really happy. If I've missed anything in the data logs, or there's anything that's confusing you, put it in the comments and I'll try to answer it. If you haven't already, click like, click subscribe, and hopefully I'll be out with another video soon.